Всім добрий вечір.
On behalf of the brave, on behalf of every father and every mother who waits for freedom, on behalf of our warriors, and paves the way for a new history.
Hello and welcome to Tochnyi Weekly, the show that gets behind the headlines to cover the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We broadcast every week at this time, so thanks everyone for tuning in, 2100 Kyiv time. Please do, if you could, like the current show. That will help us spread the word about what's going on here. It'll bring more people to the stream. And also please do subscribe to Tochnyi for future updates. And we just appreciate people spreading the word about us on other social media platforms. I think we're doing a pretty good job putting stuff out here on YouTube. So if you could point people our direction, we always appreciate it. We do our best to provide you guys accurate coverage of Ukraine. So we have a good show lined up for you today, if I do say so. First, I'll be presenting the news. That'll be followed by our German aid to Ukraine report. That'll be followed by a new article that our contributor Brendan has written. Then Colby will discuss the $8 billion aid package from the U.S. That was recently announced. And then we'll have a little bit of Q&A with the chat. So please do ask any questions in chat if you have any. And then, I'll go ahead and jump into the news. Ukraine's State Security Service announced the neutralization of a sleeper cell operating in Odessa, allegedly directed by Russian military intelligence. The so-called combat group had been tasked with seizing key administrative state institutions in Odessa during the initial stages of Russia's invasion. However, after the invasion's progress stalled, the Russian Federal Security Service ordered the group to remain dormant. I actually saw another article, I want to say it said it was GRU, so I don't know, it might be. Anyway, the SBU's intelligence efforts revealed that the group was reactivated over the summer. During their operations, the SBU detained the cell's leader, a 49-year-old who had previously lived in Crimea before relocating after 2014, along with his second in command. Authorities discovered a cache of weapons and tactical gear, including firearms with optical sights, ammunition, body armor, and other equipment. The group had recruited around 24 individuals, and the detained individuals are under investigation and will face up to 10 years in prison if convicted. On the evening of September 21st, two 16-year-old school children in Russia set fire to an Mi-8 military helicopter at the Omsk-Zverny airport in Russia. Local reports indicate that the two teens threw an incendiary device into the aircraft before fleeing on bicycles. They were later apprehended, and it's alleged that the teenagers were promised around 2 million rubles for the deed. The helicopter in question was likely an Mi-8 AMTSH model, which is designed to carry missiles. The incident is part of a series of recent arson attacks on Russian military equipment. Earlier in September, two miners set fire to another Mi-8 helicopter in the Noyabrsk airbase in Russia, reportedly for a higher promised payment. Similar acts of sabotage targeting Russian military equipment have occurred, including attacks on MiG-31 fighter jets and other military vehicles at various air bases. Some of these incidents have been attributed to a Russian resistance movement, such as the Freedom of Russia Legion, which has claimed responsibility for damaging equipment, for example, at the Bolshoye Savino airport, as well as other locations. And yeah, there's lots of other groups that, sort of take credit for this. And then also sometimes it's just random people like babushkas and 16-year-olds like this. Anyway, next item. Between September 23rd and 26th, Ukrainian cyber specialists from the main Directorate of Intelligence launched successful attacks on more than 800 servers across various regions of Russia, according to intelligence sources. The cyber operations led to the total destruction of documents and data stored in the affected servers, which belong to military, administrative, and financial institutions supporting Russia's activities against Ukraine. The data loss caused significant disruptions, leading to partial or full shutdowns for several service providers and consumers. And the event will likely require substantial resources for data recovery. Couldn't find a ton of specifics, but it was mentioned that Bank of Russia, Tinkoff Bank, Gazbank, and the SBP payment system were affected. or sorry, no, these were previous incidents. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly. There weren't like a lot of specifics about this attack aside from that they mentioned 800 servers. Okay, so yeah, sorry, next time. The Ukrainian Defense Forces are using an AI platform called Avengers to automatically detect around 12,000 enemy targets each week. This is developed by the the Ministry of Defense's Innovation Center. The system analyzes video from drones and stationary cameras, which allow for faster and more accurate decision making while reducing human error caused by fatigue. The Avengers platform is integrated with the Veja module in Ukraine's Delta battlefield management system, which I've covered previously. It's sort of their battlefield information system. It's considered pretty sophisticated for like an integrated system. This particular platform is unique globally. This Avengers platform that's part of the Delta system. It has a vast database of video footage on enemy vehicles and has continued to improve as they add more data to it from all the footage they have. It can detect various types of enemy equipment, including hidden tanks and armored vehicles in challenging conditions like forests and muddy roads. And plans are underway to expand the platform's cloud capabilities and to integrate this AI system into drones. This, I think, is about the Delta system specifically. But you can imagine this Avenger system, like it can, like a little box will show up and it'll be like tank or like car or like, person. That's kind of what it does. It's like an automatic identification assistant. So it helps people see immediately, oh, that's a tank there. It's not, it's hidden. So yeah, that's it for operational stuff this week. Next up is aid and economy. The UK announced that they're on track to deliver 16 AS-90 artillery guns to Ukraine. This exceeds their initial pledge of 12 units within 100 days. So far, 10 guns have been delivered, and 6 more are expected in the coming weeks. The contribution is part of a continued package, which so far amounts to about $3 billion total annually until around 2030. The UK has announced also the formation of a new Joint Ministry of Defense and Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, short FCDO, unit to coordinate efforts for Ukraine, led by Foreign Secretary David Lammy and Defense Secretary John Healey. The MOD is also enhancing its cyber resilience through a new pathway, which includes specialized selection and training programs. So yeah, the main thing is this office to coordinate efforts to Ukraine. I think it's like with the Commonwealth partners. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense launched the Nordic Brigade project, aiming to enhance defense collaboration with Northern European countries. The project invites Scandinavian nations to assist in arming or I should say Nordic nations, to assist in training and arming Ukrainian battalions. These countries are known for strong support of Ukraine and have been providing military aid. During a recent meeting with the Norwegian Ministry of Defense Secretary, Ukraine extended an official invitation for Norway to join the project. The meeting took place on September 17th through 19th in Norway. And Balanutsa highlighted the strategic advantage for Nordic defense companies, noting that participating in this project would allow them to showcase their defense products in active battlefield conditions. Ukrainian officials also engaged with several defense industry firms. I'm sorry, the reason I'm bringing it up this week is I think there was like some kind of a biannual like meeting that took place, and they announced like Ukraine extended this invitation again to join this program. Norway has continued increasing support for Ukraine this year, and I don't know. I hope they are part of the program. Erlend, I guess real quick, is there anything else you know about this joint, the Nordic Brigade project that you want to say?
No, I don't know anything about it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry to spring it on you. I was just curious, but anyway. So yeah, it's an interesting idea, and I think it ties into something else, which is the next story. This is kind of a short one, but during a meeting at the UN General Assembly in New York, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and French President Emmanuel Macron discussed Ukraine's military needs and battlefield conditions. Zelensky shared that France has committed to training and equipping a Ukrainian brigade, further enhancing Ukraine's defense capabilities. And Zelensky expressed gratitude to France for all their continued military support and stuff. So I don't know. It just seems to me like the reason I brought these two stories up in particular is because it seems like Ukraine is kind of moving toward maybe a model of like asking for countries to help equip specific brigades. But I don't know. Maybe that's a false pattern, but we'll see. Anyway, just kind of an interesting observation that both of these things happened this week. The production of Russia's Su-57 fighter jets rely heavily on Western microelectronics and specialized equipment, despite international sanctions, according to leaked correspondence from Russian military electronics manufacturer Micropribor. They claim Western-made components are essential for the manufacturing and testing processes of key systems for the weapon, such as the MPPU-50 radio receiver, which is used for satellite communication and radar on the jets. In August 2022, the plant requested specific foreign-made components, including the WA-36 attenuator and power supplies from international partners. These parts were procured through Russian intermediary companies that acquired them from abroad and got around the sanctions. Despite microelectronics, Russia's aviation industry also continues to source foreign machinery. Micropribor arranged the purchase of German Siemens lathes in 2012 through a Russian supplier. And to circumvent international sanctions, they use intermediaries from countries like Kazakhstan, and they have also been known to acquire military equipment from French countries, particularly for like jets and tanks and stuff. I think optical systems in particular. Also, kind of in the vein of stuff Russia's getting that we don't want them to get. Western officials have reportedly obtained evidence that Chinese companies have secretly supplied weapons to Russia for its war against Ukraine. A recent report shared with allies reveals that a Chinese company has been sending military drones to Russia for testing, with the ultimate goal of deploying them on the battlefield for Ukraine. The deal is believed to have been executed last year. One anonymous Western official confirmed that Chinese companies have been providing Russia with lethal weapons, despite public claim to the contrary. The official also referenced a Reuters report suggesting that Russia has an established secret program inside of China to develop and produce long-range attack drones for use in the war. And Secretary Blinken recently raised these concerns during a meeting with a Chinese foreign minister and expressed, increasing alarm over Russia and China's kind of military partnership regarding Ukraine. Representatives from 16 donor countries of the Ukraine Relief, Recovery, Construction, and Reform Trust Fund, or the URTF, convened in Kyiv to review the progress of ongoing projects and plan new initiatives. The URTF was established in December 2022 by the World Bank, and so far has mobilized 1.86 billion US dollars, of which Ukraine has received around 1.2 billion so far. The meeting this time focused on projects aimed at reforming sectors such as education, finance, transport, and healthcare, while also supporting Ukraine's long-term economic recovery. Some of the projects include compensation for 64,000 households for residential repairs and the construction for protective structures for energy infrastructure. And Ukraine signed agreements with the World Bank for around $415 million in funding to enhance access through the LEARN project. I think that I announced that several weeks ago. And then I would just mention, like, there were some minor, I shouldn't say minor, but like relative to usual donations. I'd say like 20, 40 million here and there from like lots of different European countries to help Ukraine's power grid this week. But it was like a little bit too much to go into specifics. But yeah, just like there's some reasonably large donations of power supplies this week from European partners. In addition to that, the Netherlands has announced a new 209 million euro support package to help Ukraine restore critical infrastructure. The package includes 45 million for the Energy Support Fund. That's what it's called, the Energy Support Fund. The aid is aimed at helping Ukraine deal with the coming winter. And they highlighted that during the G7 meeting, like the Netherlands highlighted that they have concerns with the energy infrastructure and stuff. Anyway, yeah, I wish I had like a list of all the countries that contributed. But anyway, there was like a significant contribution to the Ukraine Energy Support Fund this week by several countries. Foremost among them, the Netherlands, as usual. Thanks, guys. The U.S. government has imposed new sanctions on Russia targeting cybercrime and money laundering activities. These sanctions focus on Russian virtual financial platforms, specifically the PM2BC and Cryptex, as well as other specific Russian individuals. According to official statements from the U.S. Department of Treasury, the actions are part of an international effort to disrupt cybercrime from Russia. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network imposed restrictions on virtual currency exchanges, which they say are, I shouldn't say, but I'm sure they are correct in saying are involved in money laundering operations within Russia. And the Office of Foreign Assets Control also sanctioned Sergei Ivanov, who is a key figure in these services. The Department of State also offered a reward for $10 million for information which would lead to Ivanov's arrest and conviction. The formal charges were announced against Ivanov and another individual, Timur Shakhmametov, by the U.S. Secret Service and the Attorney's Office for Virginia. India has announced that it will not purchase liquefied natural gas from Russia's Arctic LNG-2 project, which has been sanctioned by Western countries. The Indian Oil Secretary, Pankaj Jain, stated on September 27th that India will avoid dealing with any sanctioned commodities. Arctic LNG-2, owned by Russia's Novatek, was expected to produce around 20 million metric tons of liquid natural gas annually for the Asian market and plays a significant role in Russia's goal to become a leading liquid natural gas producer. However, the project was hit by sanctions, which have severely impacted and hindered it. India has maintained reasonably strong diplomatic ties with Russia and has become one of the largest importers of Russian oil, but it has chosen, to not get involved with this project. And again, they cited the sanctions as a key factor in that. So this is kind of an interesting one. The Ukrainian Air Force has redacted an earlier report of Belarusian aircraft violating Ukrainian airspace on September 24th. Initially, it was reported that a low-speed aerial target crossed into Ukraine from Belarus near the Kyiv and Zhytomyr regions around 2:30 p.m. Ukraine time, or Kyiv time, heading south toward Kyiv Oblast. Monitoring groups such as Belarusian Hejin claim that a Belarusian Yak-30 combat aircraft was responsible for the incursion. However, later in the day, the Ukrainian Air Force clarified that the detected object was likely a radar jammer, which creates false targets rather than actual aircraft. Belarus, of course, is closely allied with Russia and hosts Russian military forces, but it hasn't been, directly itself involved in the war with Ukraine. I should also mention, I want to say one of the Shahed drones went way off course and wound up in Lithuania, but I don't want to confirm that, but I saw some buzz about that from some of the Tochnyi people. So maybe Daniela will be on later and he can talk about it. And then my last item for this week, as usual, I continue my coverage of the Mi-8 massacre that's going on. I try to cover every Mi-8 helicopter that randomly crashes in Russia. But this week, there's a twist. A chartered Mi-8 helicopter crashed during an emergency landing in North Waziristan, Pakistan, resulting in the deaths of at least 7 people. This was reported by the Times of India and Ukrinform. The helicopter, which was carrying employees of an oil company, I found the name of it, but I forget. It's a Pakistani oil company, like Oil Pakistan or something. The helicopter experienced engine failure shortly after takeoff, and it led to 6 fatalities and 8 injuries. Among the passengers were 3 Russian nationals, including 2 pilots and a crew member, although it's unclear if they're among the deceased. The crash occurred when the helicopter's tail rotor struck the ground during the emergency landing. An initial report suggests a technical fault with no signs of sabotage involved in the incident. But that's just, of course, what Budinov wants you to think. No, I'm just kidding. An investigation into the accident, according to Pakistan, is ongoing. But I think we all know the answer. The Mi-8 is killing the Mi-8 is the best secret agent for Ukraine, killing all the Russians. I hope that those poor kids don't go to jail for too long, because if they just let the Mi-8 fly, then it probably would have gone down itself. But that wraps up my news report for this week, and I will now turn it over to my colleague Germinate to Ukraine. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hello, guys. As always, I will now present the most important news from Germany regarding Ukraine. First of all, The German Federal Foreign Office has financed 70 helmets. Yeah, I know, the famous German helmets. And 70 bulletproof vests for the National Union of Journalists of Ukraine. The helmets and the vests, which were already handed over, will help Ukrainian journalists to do their job in a safer manner. On Wednesday, the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development announced that it would mobilize another 70 million euros to provide Ukrainian cities and Jesus Christ, I hate that word, municipalities with smaller combined heat and power plants, boilers, generators, and solar energy systems for this winter. The goal is to provide community centers, hospitals, schools, and other social facilities, in particular with a more secure and independent energy supply. Special focus is placed on Ukrainian municipalities that have taken in internally displaced persons. And this, by the way, comes on top of the 100 million euro basically provided for the same purpose already announced last week. So it's 170 million euros so far from Germany for the upcoming winter. And as the last item for the news segment, very good news actually, the Bundestag, so the German parliament, agreed on Wednesday to increase the German military assistance for Ukraine for the current year, so for 2024, by nearly 400 million euro. So for anyone who's willing to know, it's 397 million euro in total. There's currently no confirmed information on what will be bought with this money, but I will let you know as soon as possible, as soon as I find something out, basically. And as the video of the week, I wanted to show you interesting footage shared by the Air Command West this week of a Skynex Erlend revolver gun Mark III with Solar Sigma shield, as well as the Erlend Skymaster battle management system during practical firing somewhere in Ukraine. So far, Germany has delivered 2 Skynex air defense systems to Ukraine, each with up to 4 Erlend revolver guns Mark III. 2 additional Skynex systems will be delivered next year, so in 2025. And yeah, that's all I had for this week. Back to you, Joseph.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so up next we have a presentation from our contributor Brendan, who has published a recent article on his Substack. It's also available on our website, so we'll get a link up for you. And yeah, I'll turn it over to Brendan. Over to you, sir.
Hi, everybody. So yeah, kind of a follow-up here on my previous article, and it's pretty in-depth, so I'm not going to go over everything in the article here. I'm going to go over 2/3 of it maybe, but there's even more information in the article that I don't have the time for here, and also a lot of the content isn't monetization friendly. So in terms of getting into this, this photo here, I actually think it highlights a few things for us. Number one, it gives us a sort of geographical foundation of what we're talking about here. So you can see there the Antonovsky Bridge connecting Oleshki to Antonivka, which is a suburb in the eastern side of Kherson. And this is a sunrise on the morning of September 3rd. And that day was a relatively uneventful day in terms of drone strikes. The first week of September is sort of where we left things off. We hadn't really gone into detail as to why things had changed there. So I'm going to give some answers to some of those questions that were lingering from the first presentation that I did in the first article. We're going to tie that up, and then we're going to kind of go into a little bit of what the attacks have been doing recently. I've been, while Joseph was presenting news and German aid to Ukraine was going on, I was catching up on the Telegram channels that I'm specifically tracking to see if they'd done anything new. But nothing that I know of. So what I want to get into is the situation that we have at hand up to the current day. So the current situation, my article left off at September 20th. So I don't have any of this data in my article, but I think it's really important data because we have here the deadliest week in Kherson regarding drones since I've been tracking it. And as far as I'm aware, since the beginning of the war. So as you can see, we've got I think 41 people injured between the 20th and the 26th, and then an additional 18 just in the last 3 days. And that's just from drones. Because one other thing that's going on right now in Kherson is artillery and airstrikes have skyrocketed. They really were quiet for a while on that front. We weren't seeing sort of the daily artillery shelling that you might see in Donbass, and the daily like cab and fab strikes that you might see up in Kharkiv or in Sumy or Donbass. Um, it just wasn't very characteristic of Kherson the last 3 months. It was mostly these drone attacks, but we're seeing more of that, and we're seeing more drone attacks too. So it's a pretty dire situation in Kherson right now. And one of the things that's just come up in the last few days, this is actually from the 26th, from the National Police. And it says a 64-year-old man was blown up by a Russian anti-personnel mine in the park. He was taken to the hospital with mine explosive injuries. And what it suggests is that the enemy is carrying out remote mining. So they're using the drones now, not just to drop like 40 millimeter grenades or improvised explosive devices like they had been before, but now they're actually using these little anti-personnel mines that don't really require a whole lot of pressure to go off, and they're not necessarily going to be an injury that kills you, but it will certainly maim any civilian or soldier that steps on this. And we've seen evidence of these specific PF1s being sort of a scourge on the battlefield, I would say, in Kharkiv Oblast, in terms of my tracking of UXO. So this is an interesting development that I'm going to be tracking going forward. So just something to keep an eye on. I want everyone to know about this because I think this remote mining aspect is a completely new development. I did not write about it in the article, but I think it's scary, especially given the casualty count that we have now. It's pretty horrific. So, moving into sort of the updates from the article. So, in terms of our casualty count here, we're almost at 300, 266 as of the 20th. Of those casualties, 235 were given ages. 71 of those victims were coming just within the first 2 weeks of September. So we can see September was initially showing like it was going to be maybe an improvement, but then the last 2 weeks have been pretty horrific, especially. So the one sort of, I wouldn't call it a bright spot, but one reassuring demographic or data point is the survival rate. Most of the victims are still surviving. We're almost at 94%. And then in terms of some demographic changes, just for those that are interested in sort of the people that they might be targeting, because the thing that drew me to this was the amount of elderly people initially that were being attacked. And that's kind of what got me into tracking the drones. And then this has developed into a completely different situation since then. But we see during this time period here, 40 and 50-year-old victims are much more common. Not so much over 60, not so much under 40. So you can kind of see that even out in the data there, which is interesting sort of at the end there for people that are really into graphs. And also shout out to Chris for the graphics on this, as always. And I think a really useful data point here is, or a way to look at the data is to see a week by week overview, how we can sort of see maybe a little bit of a narrative here through the data. And I'll get into what that narrative is in a second here. So we can see this sort of drop off in the first week of September. Between the end of August, you have that spike at 38, 2 weeks consecutive, 38 casualties. And then it drops down to 8. So why does that happen? I'll answer that. But then we see a spike at 34 and then back down to 27. And we'll get into maybe why that happens as well. And then obviously, if we were to update this data now, we would see actually the highest it's ever been. It would be at 41. So that's pretty disturbing, all things considered. But let's move. Oh, does appear to be frozen. Here we go. Cool. So let's talk about the first week of September in terms of what they were targeting, some reasons why the casualty count might have been lower. First off and foremost, they were targeting objects more or less, not necessarily civilians themselves, or they might have been targeting the civilians and just not been as successful. That's one potential way of looking at it. In particular, they released a lot of videos through this specific channel, from Mariupol to the Carpathians, of the targeting successively in like 2 separate days, 3 separate attacks, as far as I can tell. But they were kind of hanging around this area because they released another video that we'll talk about later, that's right at this same intersection, in the middle of Antonivka. And you can kind of see how I provided a sort of close up, and then we get into the scale of everything here, just so everyone can understand the geographical area we're talking about. So it is a graveyard and a funeral home that we have here in the middle of Antonivka, with a lot of military graves. And a source on the ground going by signal has said that some reasons why they might attempt to attack this is because, number one, drivers are going to slow down for turns, right? If you think about it, if you're coming from the coast and heading sort of up to take a left, you're going to have to slow down to get back towards the center of Kherson. So the left-hand turn, you're going to maybe need to stop, let traffic go, and then be able to take your turn. So it provides an opportunity for the pilot to camp out, stalk, and then attack. Another reason is just general terrorism, right? Civilians might reconsider their residence in the city or in the suburbs. And I think depopulation is one of the goals of the Russians in this operation. They do want to scare people to leave ultimately so that they can retake it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But another thing that happens here is it could be specifically to target military personnel that are dealing with funeral services for soldiers, or even targeting the families of those soldiers, or other deceased people, right? Like civilians that have been killed through artillery or drone attacks previously. So it's a pretty disturbing pattern of attacks here, despite them not creating casualties with these specific attacks, as far as we could tell. The video evidence didn't provide any indication that there were civilian casualties as a result of the funeral home attacks. But also occurring within the first week of September, we have this post from Mariupol to the Carpathians in between these attacks, where you can see the intent behind this. It does suggest desecration of graves is a goal behind some of these attacks here. And an interesting fact about this video is there's a network of collaborators that are on the ground that are working with Russian mill bloggers and Russian drone pilots to convey targeting information to them. Right. So this collaborator went through the Antonivka cemetery, and I think the really important part of this here is what to do with these defenders later. Right. The answer is obvious. So it implies tampering with the graves in some kind of way, which is consistent with what we've seen in terms of reports from the national police in the last couple of weeks of people being recruited on Telegram to do precisely that, to go to military grave sites and desecrate them. So that happened yesterday in Khmelnytsky, I believe. Actually, no. It was in Ternopil. I saw a story about that on the National Police website. So this is consistent with a pattern that we're seeing in other areas. In addition to that, some victims. We didn't have very many, right? There were only 8, but of those victims, this was a fairly well covered instance, because the victim was fairly well known. He was an oncologist at the local cancer hospital. So inside of Antonivka is kind of nested this little neighborhood called Kindika. And in Kindika is the cancer hospital, the oncological hospital for Kherson. So he and his wife were driving, and you can see the same intersection in the photo down at the bottom corner on the left, you can see the pixelated funeral home in that top corner there at that same intersection. And so they took that left turn towards downtown, and it gave the drone pilot enough time to kind of stalk, catch them, and then drop a grenade directly on the driver. It killed the oncologist, unfortunately, which is it's fairly upsetting, especially since in the video you can see his wife get out of the car to go check on him. So that was pretty disturbing to see that, and then also to see the celebration of that murder as well in the social media platform Telegram in the comments. So moving on, the war on movement. So a quote from that same Telegram channel, he oftentimes posts these, I would say, cover-ups. He posts the video of the attack, of the kill, and then posts sort of a blanket statement that tries to cover up any potential war crime, but it's not necessarily very good at it. So these photos here are dating back to July 25th. So we can see like this war on transportation, the war on vehicles. This is something that's been going on for a long time. And Andrew has been calling attention to this for a year now. And I think that's important to acknowledge. These buses here, oftentimes, and there is some truth to it. Sometimes the buses are used to transport troops to and from places, or police to and from places in large numbers. But it's not consistent with the number of troops that we know to be within Kherson in terms of like making these a viable target. So one thing about these buses is we do see a video during the second week of September where a bus is attacked, and he actually says they knew the bus was empty aside from the driver, but decided to attack it anyways, and then imply that they were trying to create a mass casualty event. Right, they said the next time will be sadder. So that's one aspect of this here. It's not only a war on transportation, it's also an attempt at creating mass casualty events. And I want to talk about this idea of the red zone here. And this is one of the interesting inconsistencies, I would say, with the posting in these Telegram channels. So in order to do this report, I spent way too much time going all the way back through 3 or 4 of these drone pilots and mill bloggers and trying to get an idea of who they were, how long they've been in this area, how long they've been operating, what sort of jobs were they doing? Were they always attacking civilians with drones and we just weren't hearing about it? What was going on there? So I did some investigating, and the inconsistencies here evolve between these two channels. You have Moses, and then you have Mariupol to the Carpathians. And in the bottom post here, where there's that sort of long ovular line kind of behind Kherson, we see that that is actually part of a post from Moses where he says, we know that everything basically north of that red line, that's where the main Ukrainian force is. And that's consistent with information that we have. Excuse me. So they still attack people in Kherson itself and Antonivka, despite knowing that the main Ukrainian force, aside from a couple anti-drone teams, as far as the Russians even admit. So they know what they're doing. And over on the other side here is this sort of like, oh my God, it's handmade. I don't know if you can actually tell. If you really look at the images here, you can see gaps in the red because it's like a guy in Snapchat rubbing red highlight over a screenshot of Yandex Maps to try and create this red zone. And that's one way that you know it's really not official in any capacity. But this red zone sort of gives him the ability to attack, according to him, whatever moves within that area. So this, in his way, absolves him of any sort of war crime, we could say. But in reality, what it does is actually it kind of gives us a good idea as to where the war crimes are actually occurring. Because if you look, the red zone declared by Alex Osvodomitil or Mariupol to the Carpathians, whatever you want to call him, it all fits on the other side of, or the civilian side of Moses's map. So there's a major inconsistency in terms of the logic that they're using in terms of their rules of engagement between the two drone groups that are working together in this area. So I think it's a good idea to kind of take a look at this and look at anything that occurs within the red zone as being a potential war crime. Now, in terms of what can be done about it, we see early in September that drop off, right? That was because Moses, he went off to Kursk. We talked about that in the last stream. But another thing that ends up happening is there's a second drop off in the third week of September. And we see it go from 34 to 27 casualties. So this turning the red zone blue is sort of an idea here where we're employing EW to bring down the drones and interrupt sort of this pattern, right? And the Ukrainian admin we talked about last time had been sort of putting forward solutions with the 124th Marine Territorial Defense Brigade to attempt to bring down some of those Russian drones, the FPVs. And actually, it was just today I did a little bit of looking. They said again that they got more, and it was actually, they said they collected it from the community. So in the 29th, he said the purchase of such systems became possible thanks to financial support of the Khersonska, Novokakhovska, Malivska, Krestievska, Tavrychanska, Chaplinska, Rubanivska, and Prusivska communities on the initiative of the Kherson OVA. So we can see that they sort of crowdfunded this system amongst the communities that are still on the other bank of Kherson Oblast to employ these systems. Now, are these going to be effective? I think that's a question that needs to be asked. So from week 2 to week 3, we did see a reduction. So we could say, sure, they were effective. And we actually saw some comments from Mariupol to the Carpathians where he was raging at the loss of around 8 Mavich 3 drones that they had just received from Saldo, the occupational governor. So we do see the occupational regime, like I had mentioned last time in the last stream. He is involved in terms of bringing down, bringing aid to the guys operating out of Oleshki. And we'll talk about who those guys operating out of Oleshki are in a different stream. But week 3 to 4, we see this increase from 27 to 41. So is this the EW's fault? Is the EW not working? That's what some people have said. Some less than reliable Telegram accounts that I follow out of Kherson to try and get a more holistic perspective of the situation, consider all the sources and kind of look at where the truth lies, maybe somewhere in between. But one of them is a critique of the EW itself. Now, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the issue. I would say it might not be the EW's fault because we also could be seeing here an increase in just the volume of FPVs being employed. So that's one aspect that I think could kind of alleviate the EW from being responsible or ineffective. Additionally, the EW has been targeted by drones and artillery, MRL, CAB, FAB. All of that in the last 2 weeks has seen a major increase. So any sort of EW that's being employed is immediately a target. And the recon drone situation obviously is allowing for those assets to be targeted fairly easily within Kherson. So it might not be the EW's fault. There's other factors that sort of play into why is the EW not as effective. It could be an increase of volume attacks. It could also be the EW systems were destroyed. So just to kind of put those fears to bed, this is a video actually from Alex Osvidomitil, or Osvidomitil Alex, however you want to call him, or Mariupol to the Carpathians. This is from his channel, and this is the EW interrupting his UAV that ended up crashing. And we have Andrew's comment here, which I really liked it, so I had to include it. Yeah, it's a pretty low quality attempt at an attack, because they simply cannot see where they are going. As you can tell, that's primitive graphics at best, I think. I'm no software engineer or graphics designer, but that's where I want to leave things off. I don't want to get too far into the perpetrators just yet. I think there needs to be a little more research into who the modern perpetrators are, because I did a little research into who the past perpetrators are, but there's some new accounts, I think, that are connected to this Osvidomitil Alex guy that I want to take a look at a little bit further.
Thank you so much, Brendan. I think I'm gonna try and share my screen and ask you a couple of follow-up questions.
Absolutely.
So I think this, this red zone that you described is, don't want to necessarily put too much into it, but what do you think is their main goal of this? And do you think they're trying to legitimize their things really? It seems kind of low effort.
Well, yeah, I think low effort is kind of their MO. And in terms of it being, low effort in legitimizing things, they do just kind of put out those blanket warnings where most posts start with those like two words where it just says Kherson red zone. So they're using it as sort of a blanket cover for everything. And then they might offer like another detail where they'll say like, Kherson red zone, like, as we all know, all autobuses are potentially targets because the administration is using them to transport fighters from location to location. So you do see sort of like attempts at cover-ups, or just like, in some ways it is even like comedy for them. They do take the opportunity to make jokes too sometimes. So it's really inconsistent is what I would say, because I think it is low effort. I don't think that they're actually trying to cover their tracks, because I don't think they actually think they're going to get caught or held responsible. People might know that they did it, but are they going to be held responsible? I think that might be something kind of in Alex's head, or in some of those other drone pilots.
I mean, maybe they can cover themselves a little bit in Russia on the, but in between the people that follow their channel and maybe donate, etc. Like, yeah, well, it's in the red zone. Like, that's, I can buy that in Russia. It's kind of an something that the audience would buy as an explanation for what they're publishing. But yeah, I just wanted to show like the impact. So this is from May, 1st of May until today. All the small drone strikes in the Kherson area. And you can see in the city, it's absolutely massive.
Yeah, and I think it's important to also point out that, like, some of those markers, like, you click on it and it's a line from the Kherson ODA, and they're just like, there were 10 drone attacks today in the city. So one drone attack marker could be multiple. It could be just an individual. So it's not always great at representing the entire volume, but I think it does represent volume here. At least all of the blue markers, those are civilian casualties or infrastructure damage from drones alone.
Yep.
So I think that's pretty telling as well. So I mean, we have 300 casualties in 3 months. It's pretty insane, and it's going to get worse. I mean, the leaves are going to fall. That's one thing I didn't really say, is it's going to get worse when the leaves fall. There's no cover.
Yep.
We'll hit 50 casualties a week easy. I mean, I think we will this week. I'm sure.
Yeah, because you see all the streets there. This is a way for the civilians to kind of move a little bit more safely if they keep under the cover of the leaves. Yeah, something needs to be done quickly here, and I guess there are things that could be done, right? I know that you've been looking to advocate for something to be done about this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on getting some meetings with some Massachusetts elected officials, representatives, and senators, and then trying to lobby for some funding, get some EW in there, because obviously EW is not going to solve the situation. It can be destroyed in other ways, so you do need to keep funding EW capabilities beyond just sort of a one-time donation, I think. And also, I think it's important to point out that EW funding is going to be important going forward, because this is not just going to be Kherson going forward. This is also going to be happening in a larger volume in Kupiansk, and it's already starting to happen in incrementally larger volume in northern Chernihiv, and we saw the attack in Sumy. So it's getting worse in this area specifically, but it's also popping up in other areas as well. So I think it's important to highlight that, kind of like Joseph had said, that there's like, we're covering these atrocities specifically, but they're occurring everywhere across Ukraine. And I think it's really important to highlight that the drone problem is occurring everywhere across Ukraine as well.
Yeah, I think some more attention to the fact that you can actually finance Ukrainian acquisition of EW systems as a civilian should be brought up, and it doesn't necessarily need to be over a military aid program. It could be just funds transferred to the local units so they can acquire the necessary systems. I don't think EW alone is gonna fix this problem. In my opinion, there's a more kinetic solution to the problem that needs to be followed as well. And to succeed with that, the local drone groups, they need overmatch on the drone capacity. So they need better surveillance drones, and they need a lot more money for higher end, FPV and drones for taking out their adversaries. I think the kinetic solution is probably the best one. Same thing as with the long range strike debate. Don't shoot the arrow, shoot the archer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think like EW systems, like you'd mentioned, they can only go so far. And I think, as you guys have discussed well in depth on Tochnyi before with Daniela and his reports on FPVs, the EW war is sort of nebulous in many ways. But an attackums is very final.
Yeah. Also, like, EW is useful in this because by negating the use of the classical hobby kind FPV drone, and also with less advanced antennas, etc. They need to move forward and use more. Let's say they need to use systems that are. It's easier to discover from the sky, and also with SIGINT, because they are a lot more powerful if they want to evade EW. So you are going to force the enemy to expose themselves if they want to continue with what they're doing. So that's one of the reasons EW could be useful as well.
Yeah, we've actually seen how that's worked. The two in tandem. I know this is getting more into the perpetrators, and I said I wouldn't talk too much about it, but if you read the article, there is a specific individual that is mentioned who used to be a drone pilot, and I mean used to be because he's no longer in existence, because as his job as an artillery spotter and also a drone pilot terrorist, he had to expose himself, and he was taken out by a HIMARS strike, I believe.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, let's work together on on continuing to get eyes on this problem, and also talk to the local politicians that you are in contact with, that this is a big problem. It's easy to link them the article so you can actually show the data, and tell them that, hey, there are units around there that can fix this problem, at least they can do some mitigation to this problem if they are provided with support.
Yeah, I think support to the 124th TRO is really important in this situation, because they're the major unit that's stationed in and around the city, from my understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Are there more questions to Brendan?
I think just one person asked, what's the status of the drone operators? Are they like Army or private? Are they like their own unit, that kind of thing?
Oh, these guys are regular Army. Oh, well, Army, well, Southern District, we'll say that. I mean, technically, some of them are subordinate to the Black Sea Fleet. But yeah, regular Army.
It's not like some PMC.
Yeah, these guys aren't a BARS group. Specifically, these guys we're talking about here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Brendan, for your recent article, and sharing that with us, and sharing that with everyone else. And look forward to more of your work. I don't look forward to, I guess, the contents of it, but I look forward to you doing it and making a record of it and all that. So we'll go ahead now and move to our next topic, which is Colby is going to give us the rundown. There's a pretty massive U.S. aid package announced. It's all very complicated. We're just going to let Colby kind of break down what the contents were and kind of what the deal is there. So I'll turn it right over to you, Colby.
Thank you. So we had a we had a busy week with a lot of new commitments from the United States, totaling over $8.3 billion worth of new security assistance to Ukraine. So just do kind of a brief overview of what those commitments actually entail. And then if people have any questions, always happy to answer those. So the first thing that happened was on this past Wednesday, we had a new drawdown from Department of Defense inventory. So that was worth $375 million. And that had been initially reported back on the previous Friday. I think the media began talking that could be coming pretty soon. But they held it throughout the week, or over the weekend, and then into the middle of the week, and finally announced it on Wednesday when Zelensky was in the United States. So that package was kind of the usual list of ammunition that we are accustomed to seeing Ukraine receive for the past many months now. But there was one new thing in there which got a fair bit of attention, which is that they're going to provide Ukraine with the JSOW glide bomb as well, which is Ukraine already operates small diameter bomb, obviously, and JDAM-ER. Those are both glide bombs as well, but they're going to get JSOW as well. So that's a third glide bomb that will be made available for the Ukrainian Air Force. So that's a new munition that they're going to receive. And then the package also included at least 150 M1117 armored security vehicles and 9 M60 armored bridging tanks as well. And then just all the usual ammunition, more ammo for HIMARS and M270, artillery ammunition, various anti-tank missiles, etc. And apparently there was also additional MRAPs and light tactical vehicles, which maybe Humvees or something else. So that was the drawdown on Wednesday. That was worth $375 million. And then on Thursday, we had two other large announcements. So the first, I guess I'll talk about the other drawdown first. So after that Wednesday drawdown, there was still quite a bit of drawdown authority remaining available. $5.5 billion in drawdown authority still available. And all that was subject to expiry at the end of the fiscal year, which is the end of this month, September. October 1st marks the beginning of the new fiscal year in the United States. So all of that authority was going to expire if it wasn't utilized or directed. So the president announced that they were going to make use of all that authority, send a notice to Congress as they're required to under law, and that will give them the ability to still use all that authority that's remaining. So it won't expire anymore. So there's $5.5 billion worth of equipment that can still be sent to Ukraine, and it seems that they do intend to try and execute all of that before the end of the president's term. Remains to be seen, whether that will actually happen as they intend. But that's what it seems. That there was a statement from U.S. State Department that they plan to continue to execute that in the coming weeks and months. And there were some of the other statements from the White House kind of indicate that seems to be what the plan is. But we'll have to kind of just wait and see on that. They didn't announce yet what is going to be coming in that remaining $5.5 billion, other than there will be another Patriot battery, apparently, which they're going to provide by refurbishing some of the assets that they have in deep storage, that Ukraine can be given a third Patriot battery from the U.S. Army. But still not too much in the way of details on when that might happen and what else might be provided to Ukraine. But legally, they have to tell Congress right now what they plan on sending to Ukraine with all that $5.5 billion worth of authority, but it's not been made public at this stage. So we'll see how, again, that unfolds in the final months of President Biden's term, if they are able to get everything delivered to Ukraine in that time frame, because it's quite a lot. And they've never really announced anything close to this. Back in January 2023, there were a couple of very large drawdown announcements back then, which was just over $5 billion in total. So this is even larger than that. But with any sort of huge announcement like this, it's going to take a lot of time to get everything delivered, because they've also been saying that, they're starting to run low on their stocks for a lot of different things. So even though they have all that authority available, the question is, do they have the things materially on hand that can be transferred to Ukraine in the next few months? So we'll see how that plays out. And then, so the third component of all this is that they made a new Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative commitment for $2.4 billion. And this was also kind of light on details, but they said that there was going to be more ammunition and support for Ukraine's air defenses. So presumably there's just going to be more Patriot missiles, more AMRAAMs for NASAMS air defense systems as well. Perhaps other things, but they didn't specify. So there's that. There's also unspecified air-to-ground munitions. So unclear if that's referring to more JSOWs that they're going to order from Raytheon, or a different weapon system. That's unclear. Could really be anything. It could be more JDAMs, could be small diameter bomb, could be anti-radiation missiles, theoretically. So a bunch of different possibilities with that. So we don't know. And then there was a bunch of both counter UAS systems and additional UAS as well for Ukraine was the majority of the package, and just a bunch of ancillary stuff. So all in all, quite a large commitment, but we shouldn't expect that there's going to be too much of an immediate surge right now. They have that first drawdown will be flowing fairly quickly, but for the rest of the stuff, all the USAI commitments have to be contracted and then built. So pretty much all of that is going to be fairly long-term stuff, except for in rare occasions where they're buying something that's readily available from industry or buying something off of a partner country. And it's unfortunate that the USAI package didn't seem to include any artillery ammunition, because that's one thing they could do is use that money to go to the Czech initiative and buy some ammunition off of the global market. But the Biden administration has chosen not to take that route. So there won't be any additional artillery ammunition coming to Ukraine via that mechanism from the United States. So they're buying other stuff with this. So that's all pretty long lead time. And then, as I said, for the rest of the drawdowns that are coming, we'll see if they can manage to execute that all over the next few months up until the end of January, when the inauguration for the next president will be. I suspect that the outcome of the election in November will probably inform their decision making about how quickly they want to try and deliver all this equipment to Ukraine. So we'll see how that unfolds over the next month and a bit. How the pace of deliveries or pace of further announcements, sort of, if they give any indication about when sort of that authority, if they're going to do announce tranches and kind of tell us publicly what they're sending, or if they're just going to kind of keep that secret and only Congress will be provided with the details. So that's basically the state of what happened over the last week in U.S. aid. A lot of information that it's all on my feed as usual. As soon as things break, I post it on Twitter, so people can look there for more information. And happy to take any questions if there's anything that I didn't explain adequately.
Yeah, thanks, Colby. Real quick, I'd be remiss to ask: did you publish anything for the Insider recently?
Yes. Couple weeks ago now, I guess, where I posted a thread summarizing my latest piece a week ago Monday, I think it was. So yeah, that was written on the same topic, basically about what we might expect to happen with the remaining aid available to Ukraine, and the situation that prompted them to notify all that remaining authority to Congress, because they had initially asked Congress to just extend the period of the authority being valid for into the next fiscal year, but Congress did not do that. So they instead had to go with this sort of plan B, where they announced that they're going to execute the authority so that it doesn't expire in a couple days. So yeah, people can check out thanks for it's up on the screen now. Thank you for that, Erlend. And people can read that or read the thread that I posted summarizing that.
Yeah, and I guess my other question before we get to the audience is, how serious would you say the stocks issue is? I know it's kind of a big question. It kind of depends on which system and whatnot. But like, I mean, is kind of big picture, is there efforts being taken to remedy it? Is there alternatives we could look at? I mean, how big of an issue would you say this is down the road?
Yeah, so it's hard to speak with too much specificity because it's all not public. Some of it's classified. Most of it's probably controlled information, so a level below formal classification, but not in the public domain. In any case, so I can say that for some things, definitely there are significant challenges with inventory for certain systems. For other systems, less so. But fundamentally, it is all solvable. But solving these problems would have required a lot more action to be taken at the outset. So everything could have been, all these potential problems could have been avoided entirely or heavily mitigated. And there's still things that can be done right now to mitigate them, but there's just still a serious fundamental lack of interest in taking any sort of significant steps towards this. So, for example, the way that the United States has been supporting Ukraine via drawdowns, they've been pulling things out of their pre-positioned stockpiles. That's been one method, and they've been pulling stuff just from war reserves, and in some cases, active duty units as well have had their ammunition supplies cut, and so they're really they're kind of doing things backwards because, I mean, yes, they're always going to need to do some of that, but the United States has a lot of things in storage. So the Patriot battery is a pretty good example of this. The United States has lots of Patriot assets in deep storage, but these are not in usable condition because they're in deep storage, and they've, in most cases probably been sitting there for 30 years since the 90s, because the US Patriot Force was cut significantly in the 90s following the Cold War, and the whole military was cut a lot, but Patriot in particular, US Army Air Defense Artillery, was really cut. So there's all sorts of assets that are in deep storage that could have been refurbished, but there was basically no effort to do this until now. Now they're saying that they're going to do this, but why wasn't that done 2.5 years ago? And the same can be said for all the vehicles that are sitting in Sierra Army Depot in California. There's all sorts of armored vehicles that have been sitting in the desert for very many years. So refurbishing those has been an option since day one, but very little effort has been made to do that. They've been pulling vehicles that are in sort of active use, or they're in they're in pre-positioned stockpiles. They've been sending that stuff when they shouldn't be exclusively relying on that stuff, because once it runs out, then what do you go to? Now you're just in a position where the only thing that is left is all this inoperable equipment that needs to be refurbished. So that was a process that needed to be acted on a long time ago, because if it had, then they wouldn't be in this problem now. They would have all that refurbished equipment refurbished by now, or they could have had a pipeline established where progressively there's a pretty steady stream of that stuff being refurbished, and then it can be delivered to Ukraine. So they basically haven't done much of any of that. And also the investments that they've made in expanding production capacity for new munitions is far below what they should be doing. They've obviously put a lot of money into this, but they needed to put a lot more into it, because the scope is not big enough, and the speed with which it's been acted on is just not big enough. That they should have put a lot more money into it. They should have had much more ambitious plans. Like for 155, for example, they set a target of 100,000 rounds per month. And realistically, they probably should have done like double that. Would have been a more appropriate goal, but they just set very modest objectives at the outset. And now, 2.5 years, almost, we're heading towards 3 years into the war. Now is not a good time to be revising those targets, because, if they do, they're going to take another 2-3 years to meet the new target. So these are all things that really needed to be done early on in the spring and in the summer of 2022. They needed to be a lot more ambitious with what they wanted to achieve. But they went really a very conservative, very minimalist approach to all of these problems. So now they are in the position of saying, well, we just don't have that much stuff to send to Ukraine anymore, because we've sent a lot and our stocks are pretty empty. So we really can't send too much more. And part of that as well is that their requirements are just wrong. They have contingency plans, and they're still operating under the assumption that European command might actually have to fight Russia themselves, which is obviously not something they have to worry about right now, because Ukraine's fighting the Russians for them. All of NATO doesn't have to worry about Russia so long as Ukraine is fighting Russia. So all of any contingency plans that exist with regard to Russia should have basically been thrown out the window and said, yeah, we can afford to give Ukraine everything that we need for our own contingencies, because those contingencies are just not operable. And in the event that Ukraine, gets defeated anyway, they would still have time to rebuild those inventories. But they've taken a very overly cautious, conservative approach to this problem, and been unwilling to compromise those operational plans contingency plans, which has been highly problematic. So yes, there are definitely we're at the level of where there are physical scarcity issues for a lot of key systems, but again, it's an entirely self-created problem that was very easily foreseen, but they just did nothing. Another example of this is the debacle with cluster munitions not being sent for a year and a half. If Ukraine had been receiving cluster munitions since the beginning of the war, that would have really stretched the available ammunition a lot further, because Ukraine was forced to expend a lot more ammunition early on of the unitary explosive rounds that they were being provided, when they could have received DPCEIM instead and been able to fire a lot fewer rounds and achieve better effects. So if you're shooting at a bunch of infantry or vehicles in an open field, one DPCIM round could be more effective than firing like a dozen M107s, for example. So the amount of ammunition that Ukraine had to expend for a year basically was just vastly inflated by the fact that they were using not the appropriate ammunition for the problem set facing them. So Ukraine's rate of artillery ammunition expenditure would have actually been heavily reduced if they had more options earlier on. So all of these policy decisions have really just exacerbated the problem, where stocks were finite, production rates were not obviously what they needed to be, and now we're just having a big confluence of these problems all kind of coming at the same time now, and there's not an easy way to fix that, because things take time, obviously. They can't be fixed overnight now that they're finally kind of waking up and realizing that the cupboard is bare, and they're running around trying to see how that can be remedied. And it's not something that's going to be remedied in short time. So, sorry, very long-winded answer to your question there, but hopefully that kind of sheds some clarity on the situation for people.
Yeah, I think it was like a lot more specific than I could have hoped for. So I think I appreciate it, right? Like, this refurbishment issue is big, and this kind of, like you said, we need to change the calculus of like, we need all this stuff to fight Russia in some European war in the future. No, we can hand at least half of that to Ukraine right now and focus on maybe replenishing it later. But it's pretty obvious that we need to change that calculus. So I think those are two really good takeaways. And then obviously long-term production stuff needs to be resolved, but that's not going anywhere anytime soon. Cool. So I think we can probably go to chat questions, unless you have any questions, Erlend.
No, just questions from chat, really. So the first one is from Callan Dunn. Do you know if the third Patriot is a Pack 3? And I know there was some discussion in the chat, but maybe you have some insights.
So I would assume that whatever they are going to pull out of storage would not be in a Pack 3 configuration. So the question is, what will they upgrade it to? And I presume that they will upgrade it to a Pack 3 configuration, upgrade all the software, upgrade all the hardware, do everything that they need to do so that it can fire MSC. But we don't know, is the short answer. But I presume that that's what they will do. But these are all questions that need to be asked. What is their expected lead time to refurbish this Patriot battery that they're going to pull out of storage? And unfortunately, with what's happening in the Middle East, I mean, on an average day at a Pentagon press briefing, over 50% of the questions will be about the Middle East. And with what's happening right now at the press briefing on Friday, probably about 90% of the questions were about the Middle East. So there's like one or two questions that were Ukraine related, and none of them were about the latest security assistance packages, which is very frustrating that nobody has any interest in asking important questions to the Pentagon about these topics. But, I'm beating a dead horse about about this. Anybody who follows me knows how much I complain about this, that journalists in America are failing the public by not asking important questions. They would much rather just ask the same stupid question about the Middle East every single day and get the same stupid answer from the Pentagon, rather than asking about something important like this. So we don't know right now, and we may not ever know if nobody bothers to ask this question. So hopefully we get some clarity on it in the future, but right now we don't know.
I mean, there's at least one journalist there that keeps asking the right questions. Alex is really good, but that's just one.
Right. And Alex does not go to the Pentagon, right? He goes to state and he goes to the White House, but Alex is not at the Pentagon. So, on occasion, there are people there that will ask good questions, but it is very rare. The vast majority of them do not. It's extremely rare that you get a good question asked in any of these briefings, whether it's state, White House, or the Pentagon. It's very rare to have an intelligent question asked.
That's very sad because, even if the media houses might think that, the Middle East is the hottest topic, that's what's going to sell, etc. In my opinion, journalism is also about shaping the landscape of the media and the interest of the people with what you think is actually important. And if you're not doing that as a journalist, I don't think you're really doing your job well. And please, if you are ever in the media room there, maybe take some notes after even these Q&As we have here, and you'll probably get better questions just from the chat, than most of the stuff that is in the Pentagon media room. There was another one for Colby, I think. Yeah. Is there any news about JASM that could hit Russia? So I guess Thierry here is asking, is there any possibility that JASM might be transferred? And also, what is the kind of possible outcomes of lifting the targeting restrictions? I know I interpreted it completely the wrong way, I guess. After Biden basically went out and kind of messaged everyone that we're gonna change up the policy here, and then nothing really happened. What do you think is happening, Colby?
Yeah, I think Zelensky is leaving his meetings in the United States empty-handed on both of these questions. And in fact, something I didn't mention about JSOW is that in President Biden's statement about the latest security assistance decisions that he has made, they're framing JSOW as a long-range capability, which it is most certainly not. There's really no universe in which JSOW, in the context of how Ukraine will be able to employ it, could be considered a long-range capability. But it's one of the White House's many very clever ploys that they've used throughout this war to make it seem like they're doing things when they're actually not doing much at all. Because there were an awful lot of people actually when the JSOW news first broke that confused JSOW with JASM, which is obviously what the White House intended, because they're trying to avoid some of the heat that they've been getting on this pressure, because the pressure obviously has been continuing to mount on them, both from allies and both allies and by an emerging bipartisan consensus in Congress that they need to lift restrictions and provide more long-range fires to Ukraine. So they're really been looking for a way to try and reduce the amount of pressure that they're getting and sort of deflect. So JSOW is their latest ploy to try and make people think that they are doing what is being asked of them when they are actually not. So they've made this JSOW commitment. And, to be clear, I'm happy to see that they're getting JSOW. Again, this is something that should have been done a long time ago. There shouldn't really be any sort of these arbitrary limits on what conventional capabilities are going to be provided to Ukraine. Pretty much all of them should be on the table, essentially, with a few exceptions. But JSOW is not JASM, so JASM is not something that people should expect is going to happen anytime soon. The lifting of long range strikes is not something. The prohibition on long range strikes is not something that people should expect anytime soon. It's unclear whether they're even going to let the British and the French. If Ukraine will be able to use Storm Shadow and Scalp PG, but long range strikes with ATACMS is definitely not on the table still. And for Storm Shadow and Scalp PG, the relevance of that is rapidly diminished because there's just so few of those missiles left because Ukraine has used an awful lot of them. And the utility of any of these strikes is severely limited if Ukraine can't generate complex raids with them by using multiple different weapon systems in conjunction. So just using Storm Shadow or Scalp PG on their own, or just using ATACMS on their own, is not really that effective. And it's going to continue to be even less effective over time because the Russians have improved their air defense interception rates against all of these missiles. And the only way to mitigate against that is for them to be used in complex raids in conjunction with each other. But that is not really on the table, at least for attacking Russia right now. So it's very annoying, very frustrating, very disheartening, but all people can do is just continue to maintain pressure on this topic because the pressure does have an impact, but the decision-making process has not really developed as rapidly as we would have liked, and it doesn't seem like the president has made a favorable decision on this question yet. So,
yeah, I think there's a lot of people who thought that this is a cruise missile, but it's a glide bomb. I think some of the reason for that is the maximum target distance of 130 kilometers. But the thing is that that's when you drop it from the maximum altitude, which is not going to be the case. The Ukraine is not going to be able to fly F-16s and drop them from the maximum altitude. They're going to have to pop up a few thousand feet at maximum and drop them, which is going to lower the range substantially. So I seriously doubt that we're going to see any max range utilization of this weapon.
Yeah, that's correct. And yes, a lot of people did call it a cruise missile, and part of that is Navarre's fault because everybody at Navarre is, I don't know, severely handicapped or something. They actually describe it as a missile on their website, which again just shows how cooked Navarre is, that they can't even correctly describe their own ordnance because it is not a missile. Missile has a actual technical definition in the defense sphere. It's something that has independent propulsion, and there is no independent propulsion on JSOW. It's a glide bomb. It doesn't have an engine or a motor of any kind. It just relies on the transferred energy from the aircraft that's releasing it, right? So you have an aircraft that's going really fast. You drop the bomb. The bomb, gets transferred some of that kinetic energy, and it can glide through the air. That's my grade 5 physics explanation. People, John can go into it more if people have more questions, but anyway, yeah, it's not a missile, it's a glide bomb. So very limited range in the way that Ukraine will end up using these, because it will not be a high speed, high altitude release. And again, it's any weapon Ukraine gets is a good thing. Again, glad to see these being provided. It's been something that John and I have been asking about for quite some time, but it's not even at all close to being comparable to JASM or any other sort of long range capability. Like this will have less range than Gimler's will. So yeah, it's not extending Ukraine's long range fires. It's just another tool that they can use to hit Russian frontline assets, really. It's not any sort of deep strike weapon.
It's a similar capability to the JDAMs that they already had in the French ASM hammer weapon. So I think the fact that this weapon is not so well known has confused a lot of people. this is certainly a good capability to have for Ukraine, and probably is going to, as far as I understand, with the F-16s, they're going to have a higher hit rate than not the JASSM, but the JDAMs had initially. So what really confuses me though is that everyone said, yeah, there's no way we're going to see the F-16 being pushed up to do any sort of ground attack missions in the beginning. So that confuses me a little bit. And since I'm not an aviation guy, I would love to hear someone saying that this is a good idea right now.
Yeah, well, there was like one report that emerged that Ukraine may have done sort of a more of a frontline combat sortie with F-16s so far. So it very well may have happened, but as John and I have been saying, people should not expect that this is going to be a super common routine thing. And it hasn't been. Like, F-16s had been in Ukraine for a little bit, and we saw that, that report did not emerge for a while. So Ukraine was using them very conservatively for defensive counter air. And we saw that they unfortunately lost an F-16, which, again, we said that, that was to be expected, that, losses would happen. And because losses are going to happen and Ukraine only has a small number of F-16s right now, they're just going to have to be conservative with them. So, as they get more comfortable, we'll see them start to expand the range of different missions they're going to fly with the F-16s, but they still have to be very conservative with them. And so there's not a massive need for them to take those risks and fly a lot of close air support missions, because they have JDAM and small diameter bomb integrated with their legacy fleet. And I don't see any reason why they couldn't integrate JSAW onto those aircraft as well. So it's not that they have to necessarily use these in conjunction with F-16. They may elect to. They may decide that they don't want to try and get that integration with a legacy aircraft done, but that's certainly something that theoretically should be on the table. And as they get more aircraft in, then they can be more comfortable about undertaking higher risk missions with them to deploy those JSOWs. But ultimately that problem will, as more aircraft get delivered, then they'll have more freedom of operation with them.
Yeah, there's been rumors that the Dutch or a batch of Dutch aircraft are soon heading to Ukraine. I don't know if you know anything more about that, but they had this farewell ceremony in very conveniently in the Netherlands.
Yeah, I saw something about that, but I don't have any details about when Ukraine should expect more and how many. I don't have any insight really into that beyond what might get reported in the media.
Yeah. There's a question about the current Patriot fire units. Are they all PAC-3 capable?
All the American ones are MSE capable. The German ones are PAC-3 capable, but may or may not be MSE capable. So that's not 100% certain. But all the American ones can fire MSE for sure, and the German ones may or may not be able to, because the MSE upgrades were in progress, as I understand it. And I'm not sure if they were all completed or not when Germany began donating their own Patriot batteries to Ukraine. Okay, Murray says Murray says it's still underway, which was my understanding that they were still underway. I don't know if the ones that Ukraine got had been completed yet, but as I understand it, it's those upgrades are still happening. So the safe thing to say is that they are capable of firing PAC-3 and PAC-3 CRA, but may not be capable of firing MSE.
They won't be able to fire MSE missiles because we always delivered an older system when we got the newer one, which already got the MSE upgrade basically from the industry. So yeah, just what you said, everything was fine.
Erlend, Lord help me for what I'm about to do. It's for chat. I do all of it for you, chat. Erlend, what do you think about Italy's recent behavior on Ukraine? Do you think have they given anything significant? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, so there is light in the end of the tunnel for the SAMP-T battery, at least, or fire unit. The latest reports from Italy, both from the ministry or the Minister of Defense, which I think is a clown, but that's another thing. He's been lying his ass off since the first announcement about when this fire unit was going to come. They promised at the G7 meeting that it was going to be operational within the summer. I think they said next month, which was July at the time. So the G7 was in the end of June. Didn't happen in July. Obviously, that was not going to happen because the battery was still traveling or getting transported from Qatar at that point in time. So the latest news and the promise is that it will be operational within the month. But that didn't happen. And then the Italian MOD clarified that it was being transported to Ukraine right now and is going to be in Ukraine next week. So they lied and they lied again. But maybe it's going to be in Ukraine next week, and that means could be operational in Ukraine within a few weeks, I guess, realistically. That's one SAMP-T battery. This does not it does not cover the Italians' asses, in my opinion, because they don't provide any meaningful aid to Ukraine at all, except this. It's a very small contribution in the larger picture, considering that Italy has one of the largest armies and militaries in Europe, very large weapons industry, and they've been sending absolute garbage to Ukraine that had to be sent out of Ukraine to Poland for maintenance even before it was sent to the battlefield. That's basically what's happened the last 1.5 years or 2 years since the Meloni government took over. There were some transfers of weaponry that was already sanctioned by the Draghi government that continued to happen on a semi-regular scale for the year after Meloni took over the government, but nothing of big significance. And I'm very sad that they're sending, old Puma 6x6 APCs with absolute no protection. This is not the aid that Ukraine needs. It's okay. It has a powerful engine. It's pretty fast. That's basically the only positive thing about that vehicle. It has Standard 1 protection, which is something that police forces uses in riot control. And within the first week that it was transferred to Ukraine, there were a couple burnt out. So Italy has great potential for assisting Ukraine, especially when it comes to certain munitions and also other weapon systems, counter UAS systems, remote weapons stations, etc., which they could invest in, and they could have also invested in and participated in the 1 million shells for Ukraine initiative, which is, by the way, also continuing. So EU-funded investment for local industry and also acquisition of shells for Ukraine. They could have participated in this, whether it being with the metallurgic part or explosives, but they didn't. They didn't apply for any of the initiatives. So I want to be clear that Italy is not doing enough. I welcome any help, and SAMP-T fire unit is great, but Italy is one of the largest powers in Europe. And my country, which I complain about not doing enough, is doing 4 or 5 times the amount of military aid, and I'm very upset with my own country's contribution. So no, Italy isn't really doing anything. And also the big issue is that they're actively not, they're turning a blind eye to almost all of the sanction evasion that is happening. And that is not a surprise, but no one really talks about it. Yeah, my Italy rant.
Thank you, Erlend. I appreciate it. When's the next Italian space, Erlend?
Oh, we should probably do one. There's also this kind of crazy thing happening there with billboards and posters popping up all over Italy. Basically, blatantly pro-Russian billboards with like Russia is not our enemy, and 2 hands meeting, one with the Italian flag and one with the Russian flag. And there's some investigations about how this is funded, and there's some really nasty stuff behind these kind of posters and other pro-Russian initiatives all over Italy. And it's very sad because there's a strong, pro-Ukrainian community in Italy. There's a lot of good initiatives, a lot of Ukrainian refugees, and quite a large diaspora as well. And it's simply insulting to all of those people.
Yeah, you guys usually do the Italian spaces on Twitter, right? You haven't done one on YouTube?
Yeah, I think we're probably gonna try and do another space in Italian soon. I think
on Twitter, you think?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think so, because what the aim of those spaces have been is kind of trying to involve more of the pro-Ukrainian, or just people who are interested in it, involved in spaces and stuff, because they don't really do spaces in Italy.
Yeah, I think you guys do a great job. I want to say you're probably the premier Italian space on Twitter, at least for pro-Ukraine stuff. And I think you guys get like the best experts and stuff for Italian language. So yeah, looking forward to when you guys do that again. I guess like follow Tochnyi on Twitter, YouTube audience, if you're an Italian speaker and you're interested in an Italian language pro-Ukraine Twitter space. They usually get some like Italian journalists on and like some military experts. So it's usually a good time. So yeah, it probably doesn't apply to a lot of people who don't speak Italian, but I think they're doing a good job to at least try to move the needle a little bit in terms of like public opinion in Italy, which is like, not nothing. So yeah, good job, guys. And any other questions we want to cover?
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm not sure if it's going to be a space. Maybe we'll do it here, but it's definitely going to be announced on Twitter. I'm going to ask the other Italian guys in Tochnyi, and I think it's time for another Italian special.
I agree. It seems like we have a pretty like solid Italian cadre in the chat, and it feels like you guys can do it. You got some momentum.
Yeah, this is a very personal opinion, if I'm allowed, but I'm very worried when I see so many pro-Ukrainian and not just pro-Ukrainian, but international voices highlighting the whole speech thing that she did at the Atlantic Council and in the Italian Parliament without understanding what's actually going on in Italy. It's very worrying, because there's a lot of scary stuff happening in Italy, and she's certainly a part of it, in my opinion. So normally I don't talk so much about personal political preferences, but I would rather have a normal conservative right-wing party in Italy, a strong one, than the current state of things there.
Yeah, Italian politics is like Very, very difficult, I think, to understand unless you're pretty well versed in it. So we'll leave that to you guys, I think.
Yeah, no, I see that in chat. Like, yeah, definitely there's nothing is. I'm not saying things are better on the other side of the aisle in Italy. There are scary movements of populism and left-wing radicals as well, and they are maybe more. No, they're more or less the same open pro-Russia as Salvini's Lega. So Italy is kind of scary. On one side, I'm happy that at least Meloni is trying to keep Italy within the boundaries of the political alliance that the EU is, and trying to operate within the EU. But on the other hand, I'm kind of scared at seeing what is happening in Italy in the information space, and that nothing is really being done against Russian influence.
Yeah, and I think it's I don't know. It's good to have political discussion sometimes, and I think we live in countries that have democratic expression. We're allowed to voice our opinions, and like, I don't know, change governments if we don't like them. And I would tend to agree with Erlend that I think it's more about moderates at this point. I don't really care. Like, it seems like the two radical extremes tend to be easily corrupted into thinking that Russia can somehow benefit them or something. And this seems true in a lot of European countries and the US and lots of places, right? So it seems like the best way to deal with Russian influence is to have moderates that are going, no, that sounds crazy. Let's stick with the plan of isolating this war criminal fascist mafia state, right? No offense, of course, to our Italian friends. And yeah, so I don't know. I think that's kind of the takeaway, right? Yeah, I think, do we have any other questions, or should we start wrapping up?
I just saw that I caused some discourse in the chat. That's fine, as long as
Lively,
people
free
don't
political
insult.
discussion in a vibrant democracy, Erlend.
Yeah, that's very good.
So yeah, I think we can probably just wrap it up then, eh?
Yeah, you had a last thing, didn't you?
Oh yeah. So yeah, I'll go ahead and start my little wrap up here. So yeah, thanks everyone, of course, for tuning in. First, I wanted to say we have, we've got several applications for editor position. It's on the website. I guess you can still apply. We'll throw it in the batch. We're gonna start moving on that. It's just been a while. We're trying to collect as many as we can so we can do it all at once. But yeah, if you're interested in a volunteer editor position, it's still open. This is probably the last week we do open calls for it. Yeah, we don't have to have editing skills, but we expect maybe about 1 to 3 hour commitment a week if you're interested in helping out a volunteer project. We got a lot of great researchers and stuff, so we're just trying to get more of that published and into a production quality format and stuff. So yeah, editor position still open. You can head down to the website, take a look. You can also, while you're at the website, you can check out all the great articles that people like Brendan write, that people like Daniela write. Lots of great stuff on the website. Chris and Germinate to Ukraine work very hard to make it real nice and professional. So go check out Tochnyi.info. Yeah, subscribe to us, of course, on YouTube. Please like the streams. Definitely helps spread the word. We've been very slowly gaining momentum. I think part of our problem was we really missed out on the early social media trends about Ukraine, and kind of as Colby mentioned, there's lots of other stuff going on in the world. Look, this stuff going on in the Middle East is pretty crazy right now. I kind of understand why it's tough, and it's unfortunate that Ukraine has to compete for attention in this world, but it does. So we do our best to shine a light on stuff and show you guys material that doesn't always make it into what mainstream media coverage Ukraine does get, which tends to be limited. So spreading the word about us both on YouTube, and then also if you could follow us on Twitter, or if you want to, we tend to have updates and stuff on Twitter. That's our main way to communicate, I guess, for now. We do have Blue Sky as well, so if you're interested in following us there, you're more than welcome to join us there and get away from the crazy oligarch Elon Muscovy. Yeah, I think that's about it. So I'm just going to maybe one more thing, which is, as Brendan mentioned, it's difficult. Every week I check the news. Of course, I do my news report, and it's just every week it is mentioned that there are horrible strikes against civilians by Russia. Like, this is a daily occurrence, basically. I would say every few days there's a major incident, and every day there's a minor incident. Just this week, there was a hospital in Sumy that was struck. 8 people were killed and lots more were injured. Very, very bad attack on civilians. But I guess, I just wanted to bring attention to maybe one that is kind of significant, particularly because one of our contributors, Vasil from Dnipro in Ukraine, made a post about it, and that is that there was a Supreme Court judge in Ukraine, and he was Leonid Loboyko, and he was delivering humanitarian aid to Kharkiv. He was in a vehicle with 3 women, and the vehicle was hit by a drone and blew up, and he was killed, unfortunately. And yeah, I don't know, just seems like a very good person that Ukraine had, a Supreme Court justice who was willing to personally go out and give humanitarian aid to people that were suffering. And the fact that Russia targeted a civilian vehicle with 4 civilians in it, 3 of whom were women who were delivering humanitarian aid to civilians, pretty messed up. And I don't know, just part of the story of Ukraine continuing to lose their best people to Russian terrorism and the war. And we hope that Western countries really step up and try to take this more seriously. As Colby mentioned, there's just stuff that we should have done 2 years ago that we should still do today that we still aren't doing, and it needs to be done and fast, so that more victims of this terrorist regime aren't created. So yeah, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, of course, to our live audience. We really appreciate everyone in chat, especially the lively. I'm learning so much about Italian politics right now. I love it. And yeah, thanks to chat for your questions, for all your discussion. We really do appreciate all your all the stuff you guys ask us and give us good ideas about what we should explain better, or what we should cover, and things like that. So thanks for your contributions. Thanks everyone who tunes in after as the video on demand. We know not everybody can make it at 2100 Kyiv time. 2100 Kyiv time. That's when we broadcast every Sunday. So yeah, for people who watch the videos after, thanks for your support as well. We know a lot of people watch them after the fact, so thanks for that. And yeah, thanks to our great panel. I think we had a lot of great research presented this week, and they do a lot of hard work to make sure that all that stuff's accurate for you and get it in a nice presentable format for an audience. So thanks, guys, as always. And with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up with our traditional goodbye, which is, of course, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!